Once upon a time in a town called Kaydee, there live a couple named Mr. and Mrs. Lawson. After 10 long years of waiting, praying, and countless visits to doctors and specialists, Mr. and Mrs. Lawson finally held their miracle, a baby girl they named Amora. She was everything they had dreamed of and more, her tiny fingers curling around theirs like a promise of hope and new beginnings. Her soft coos and the delicate rise and fall of her chest filled their hearts in ways they had forgotten was possible. After many years of marriage, the couple went through many fertility issues. As if that alone wasn't enough to keep them worried, some friends keep throwing shades at them, indirectly pressuring them to have babies. Oftentimes, at night, Mrs. Lawson would weep uncontrollably and Mr. Lawson would have no other choice than to set his pain aside and comfort his wife. To Mrs. Lawson, Amora, their daughter, was proof that miracles existed. Every time she looked at her daughter, tears welled in her eyes, remembering all the nights she had cried in silence, afraid the day would never come. Now, here she was, a perfect, healthy baby girl cradled in her arms. Mr. Lawson felt the same. He found himself spending hours just staring at her in awe, unable to believe she was real. Her birth was a blessing straight from the heavens, a gift too precious to describe. For the first few weeks, everything seemed perfect. Friends and family visited daily, showering Amora with gifts and affection. The house buzzed with activity, and the once somber silence that had plagued the Lawson home for so long was replaced with laughter and love. But as night fell over the house, something strange began to unfold. It started subtly at first. In the nursery, just as the moonlight filtered softly through the curtains, Bruno, their old German shepherd, would take his usual spot beside the crib. The Lawsons thought it was sweet. Bruno had always been a loyal dog, and it made sense that he'd take a protective interest in the new addition to the family. But soon, his behavior grew odd. His watchfulness became almost obsessive. Every night, at exactly midnight, Bruno's body would tense, his ears standing on end as if listening to something no one else could hear. His golden brown eyes, which normally held a calm, gentle expression, now gleamed like twin lanterns in the dark. His lips pulled back slightly, and a low, guttural growl rumbled deep in his throat. At first, Mrs. Lawson dismissed it as nothing more than the dog reacting to the baby's movements. He's probably just adjusting, she told herself. But the growling didn't stop. Every night at midnight, without fail, Bruno would growl. Not a playful rumble or a brief bark, but a steady, menacing growl that seemed to come from a place of primal instinct. He never barked. He never lunged. He simply stared into the shadows around the crib, his eyes locked on something no one else could see. His growl was low and constant, vibrating through the floor like a warning. The unsettling part was that Amora always remained calm during these episodes. She didn't cry or fuss. She just stared back at Bruno, her wide, innocent eyes unblinking, as though she understood his unspoken warning. Then one night, Mrs. Lawson decided to watch for herself. She sat quietly in the nursery, rocking Amora to sleep while keeping an eye on Bruno. Midnight came, and right on cue, the dog's ears twitched. His body went rigid, and his growl started, soft at first, then louder. His eyes narrowed, fixed on a corner of the room where the shadows pooled darkest. A chill crept up Mrs. Lawson's spine. She squinted into the darkness, but there was nothing there. Nothing she could see, at least. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, colder. Bruno's growl deepened, his muscles coiling as though ready to pounce. Mrs. Lawson's breath hitched. Her pulse quickened. She leaned forward, whispering, "Bruno, what is it? What do you see?" The dog didn't turn or respond. his gaze remained locked on the shadowy corner, his growl unwavering. For the first time, Mrs. Lawson felt a flicker of true fear. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. And it had just begun. At first, the Lawsons thought nothing of it. Bruno had always been protective, and it made sense that he'd watch over the baby like a guardian. But the growling didn't stop. Night after night, it came, deep, guttural, almost warning. Mrs. Lawson grew uneasy. She found herself waking up at midnight, holding her breath as she listened to the unsettling sound. "Do you think something is wrong with Bruno?" she asked her husband one night. "Bruno's just being Bruno," Mr. Lawson reassured her, though his own eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. "He's probably just adjusting to the baby's presence." But Mrs. Lawson wasn't convinced. There was something strange about the way Bruno growled, not at anyone in particular, but at the very air around the crib. One cold, stormy night, the growling turned into a full-blown snarl. Bruno barked furiously, his body rigid, teeth bared. The baby began to wail, her cries echoing through the house. Mrs. Lawson rushed into the nursery, her heart racing, only to find Bruno standing protectively in front of the crib, his eyes locked on something unseen. A chill swept through her as she felt a presence, cold, heavy, and suffocating. It was as if the room itself was alive, watching her with unseen eyes. That night, they called Pastor Thomas, an old family friend known for his wisdom in spiritual matters. When he stepped into the nursery, his face darkened, and his eyes narrowed. "There is something here," he said gravely. "Something that should not be." He closed his eyes and began to pray. The room grew colder, and for a brief moment, the air seemed to crackle with energy. Then, silence. The pastor turned to the Lawsons. "Your child is special. She carries a light that the darkness fears." What do you mean?" Mrs. Lawson stammered. "There's a spirit that has been lingering in this house, waiting. But your dog, Bruno, he's been fighting it off every night. He's been protecting her from something far worse than you can imagine." Mrs. Lawson clutched her baby to her chest. "But why? Why now?" Pastor Thomas looked at the child and then at the old dog, his eyes filled with something between awe and sorrow. "Your daughter has a gift. One that will reveal itself in time. But with that gift comes danger. Bruno knows this, and he's sworn to protect her at all costs." The Lawsons never looked at Bruno the same way again. From that night onward, they let him keep his midnight vigil without question. The growling continued, but they understood now, it wasn't a threat. It was a warning. And though they didn't know what lay ahead for Amora, they knew one thing for sure: Bruno would always be there, watching, growling, guarding her from the shadows that no one else could see. But what they didn't know was that the battle had only just begun. Days turned into weeks, and the growling persisted. Pastor Thomas's words lingered in the air, thick and heavy with unspoken truths. Amora was no ordinary child. There was something special about her, something that drew the light and the darkness in equal measure. Mrs. Lawson became obsessed with finding answers. She scoured old family records, dug through forgotten photo albums, and even visited her late grandmother's house in the countryside. It was there, in the dusty attic, that she found the journal. It belonged to her great-grandmother, a woman named Adoma, known in their village as the Light Bearer. Adoma was gifted, able to see beyond the physical world, heal the sick, and banish evil spirits. But with her power came danger. According to the journal, a dark spirit named Okaru had once tried to destroy Adoma. Okaru was a restless soul, banished from the land of the living for his wicked deeds. He vowed revenge, promising to haunt Adoma's bloodline and snuff out the light wherever it appeared. Mrs. Lawson's hands trembled as she read the final entry. The spirit waits in the shadows. One day, a child of my bloodline will carry the light again. She will be the key to restoring balance, but Okaru will stop at nothing to claim her soul. If she survives, she will be a beacon of hope for many. If she falls, darkness will reign. Tears welled in her eyes as she closed the journal. Amara was the child of prophecy. The light had returned in her, and Okaru was hunting her just as he had hunted Adoma. As Amara grew, strange things began to happen. She had a calming presence that no one could explain. Babies stopped crying in her arms. Plants that seemed withered would bloom when she touched them. And those who were sick found relief just by being near her. But her true gift revealed itself on her 5th birthday. It was a sunny afternoon, and the Lawsons had thrown a small party for her. Friends and family gathered in the backyard, laughing and enjoying the celebration. Suddenly, the sky darkened, and a chill swept through the air. Bruno, now older but still vigilant, began to growl. Without warning, Amara collapsed. Her body convulsed, and her eyes rolled back. Mrs. Lawson screamed, rushing to her side. But before anyone could react, a dark mist began to swirl around the child. Okaru had come for her. Pastor Thomas, who had become like family to them, raised his hands in prayer. But this time, the power of the spirit was stronger than before. The darkness closed in, suffocating, almost choking the light out of the room. Then Amara's eyes snapped open, glowing with a soft golden light. Her small hands reached out into the air, and the darkness recoiled. The air seemed to hum with energy as a burst of light erupted from her body, filling the room with warmth and peace. The mist vanished, and the chill lifted. Amara stood, her eyes now calm and clear. "He won't hurt us anymore," she said softly, her voice carrying a wisdom far beyond her years. "He's gone." From that day on, Amara's gift grew stronger. She became known as the healer of light in their community. People came from far and wide to see her, bringing their troubles, fears, and ailments. Amara's touch brought healing not just to the body but to the soul. The broken found peace. The lost found direction. Crops thrived in seasons of drought, and families found prosperity where there had once been struggle. Her light brought unity to a community once divided by fear and uncertainty. Even those who had once doubted her gift became believers when they saw how her presence transformed lives. Bruno remained by her side until his final days, his mission fulfilled. His once vibrant form had grown frail with time, but his unwavering loyalty never dimmed. On his last night, beneath a sky speckled with countless stars, he rested his head on her lap. His once watchful eyes, which had seen countless battles and guarded her through the darkest nights, were now soft and peaceful. Amara gently stroked his fur, her fingers trembling as the weight of goodbye pressed upon her heart. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she managed a bittersweet smile. "Thank you, Bruno," she whispered, her voice breaking. "For everything. I promise your sacrifice won't be forgotten. The light will live on." His ears twitched ever so slightly at her words, and with a final, contented sigh, he closed his eyes forever. The world seemed to hold its breath, mourning the loss of a silent hero who had given everything to protect it. Amara sat there for hours, cradling her beloved companion, until the first light of dawn kissed the horizon. Only then did she rise, her heart heavy but resolute, carrying the memory of Bruno as a beacon of strength. Years passed, yet the memory never faded. Amara returned to the nursery one quiet afternoon, the very place where their journey had begun. She stood at the threshold, her eyes sweeping across the room. Some light streamed through the windows, filling the space with warmth and life, yet a faint echo of the past lingered in the air, a whisper of battles fought, sacrifices made, and promises kept. In her arms, she held her own child, a new light, a new beginning. The baby cooed softly, oblivious to the weight of history around them. Amora pressed a kiss to the child's forehead, her heart swelling with love and hope. The battle was won, she whispered, but the story isn't over. It never will be. The light will always shine, as long as there are those brave enough to protect it. And as she spoke, the nursery seemed to hum with life, a quiet affirmation that the cycle would continue. Guardians would rise, just as they always had, and the light would endure, because courage, love, and sacrifice were eternal. Amora turned, walking into the future with her child held close, the legacy of the past burning bright in her heart.